our webinar this afternoon, Image Levitation with Eddie Tapp. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with Eddie. You have in the control panel for the GoToWebinar system, there is a questions tab. Unfortunately, we have far too many folks to be able to have everybody talking at the same time. So if you have any questions, please type them in the questions tab, and we will break in when appropriate and get your questions directly to Eddie. So we're really looking forward to see what Eddie has for us today. I've really enjoyed his webinars in the past. And once again, we'd like to thank our sponsor today. Our sponsor today is X-Rite. And please visit their website at X-Rite Photo to see all of the color solutions available to photographers. I'd also like to introduce Eddie. For those of you that may not know him, we are honored to have Eddie here today as our guest presenter. Eddie is an educator, photographer, author, consultant, and Photoshop Hall of Fame inductee. He's also a member of the X-Rite Coloratti and a Canon Explorer of Light, and has shared his knowledge around the world through his numerous publications, workshops, and instructional DVDs. Now we're also, many of us, very curious about the tools that other photographers use. This is a list of Eddie's primary toolbox, and this is certainly a set of tools that, based on the quality and beauty of his work, has served him well. So once again, we are happy that he has fit us into his busy schedule. Much appreciate the opportunity to learn from a true digital master. So, welcome Sensei Tapp, your grasshoppers await. So Eddie, I'm going to make your screen live and take it away.
Hello there. Am I live now?
You are live now. Just waiting for you to give us your screen.
Oh, okay. Give me my screen. Show my screen.
There you go. I'll let you know when you're in.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here with my ASMP guys and gals and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It's certainly an honor to be here. I go way back to the times when it was the American Society of Magazine Photographers, and ASMP plays and has played a big part in my career. So it's a great honor to be here with you today. And today we're just going to have some fun looking at a variety of different, what I call, and what Liz came up with the name Image Levitation, which I think is pretty fantastic.
Hey, Eddie, if I can break in 1 second.
Sure.
Some folks are having trouble hearing. If you would check in your control panel to double check that your microphone audio is turned all the way up as far as your input goes.
Give me just a second here. You're talking in system preferences?
Yes, right in the sound there. Just check that your input.
Oh, there we go. My apologies.
There we go.
My apologies.
Not at all. And I also see it looks like you're going to torture us by working in Photoshop CS5.
Well, I have to mention that I have a beta copy, and yes, I will torture you, even though if we have time at the end, I'll torture you with some wonderful new features. But outside of that, most everything that I do is pretty much classic to any version of Photoshop. So I'm not going to show you any frilly things that can't be done, pardon me, in any version of Photoshop. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and I will go to the mini bridge here. Let me hide the information in the background here. There we go. Back in Photoshop, let's go to the mini bridge. And what I'd like to start out with is showing you how I like to set up my color management in Adobe Camera Raw. And at the very bottom of the screen is this blue purple line. I'm going to click here, and this takes me to my workflow options. My choice for color working space for my raw files is ProPhoto RGB, and in 16-bit. Of course, ProPhoto RGB and 16-bit go hand in hand. And at the very bottom is this option, Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. And what I found recently is that I'm so concerned to get the best possible quality out of my work that working from smart objects from the raw files has become a pretty interesting proposition. I'll get into that just a little bit in just a few minutes. strictly for this webinar, I'm going to change my workflow options to 8-bit, and I'm just doing this for the webinar so things will work a little bit faster and smoother. ProPhoto, of course, is best suited for 16-bit, so I'm going to ask your forgiveness for that for now. Let's go ahead and open this image. And I'd like to share with you some information that I'd love to share with any audience that I work with when I'm doing seminars, and that is, in fact, the ability to look at my screen and make a judgment call as far as the color, the tonal values that I'm looking at. And needless to say, what I'm gearing this little bit of conversation to is monitor calibration. And before I go any further, I'm going to go to my system preferences, into my displays, and color. And I want to show you something that might be of interest to some of you. And what I'm going to do is click this option that will show or release the display. There it is. Here it is. Sorry about that. Show profiles that are in my system, in this particular system. This is my presentation system. This isn't my normal system. However, I do want to change profiles here just to give you kind of a shocking idea of what the image might look like with a non-calibrated display. You know, with some of my clients and some of the students I work with, I might go into a calibration process where we calibrate the display, and their comments are, you know, my display looked better before it was calibrated. As might be the case with this generic profile here, I kind of like the image with that kind of contrast. But the fact is, this is what my image looks like. This is what I can work on, get predictable results, especially when I go into a color managed output. So the display profile is absolutely imperative to my work, and it should be, and I'm certain it is to most of your work too. So calibrating your display is the most important thing in workflow, in my opinion. As a matter of fact, when you think about color management issues, half of the battle is, in fact, calibrating or properly calibrating your display. So I can't see any questions yet, but if you have questions, please do enter them, and we'll certainly get to them in just a little bit. Well, one of the things listed in my presentation was what I call double smart processing, and it has to do basically with what I showed you just a moment ago, preparing my raw files to work as smart objects. And before I get into more of a smart object double profiling or double smart object workflow, because I have this picture up of Randoline, I'm going to go ahead and use a smart filter. Now, of course, the image opens up automatically as a smart object from Adobe Camera Raw, because I've set my preferences the way we looked at. So what I'd like to do now is just add a filter, and because we have a smart object, the image is already converted for smart filters, but I'm going to go to the radial blur filter, and here I'm going to take the blur amount at 100% using the zoom tool and positioning my cursor in the blur center. I'm just going to reposition the blur center just a little bit here. And of course, this is going to create a zoom blur. And I'm not quite pleased with the blur center yet, so let's go back to the layer panel. And right at the bottom where it says radial blur here, I'm just going to double click on the name radial blur. This will bring right back the controls, whether I bring it back right now or tomorrow. It'll bring back the exact controls of the filter I've used. And what I'm doing at this point is repositioning the blur center. And now that I've done that, on the right hand side here, and I'm going to zoom up for you for just a moment. On the right side, this little icon allows you to get to the filter blending options. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to zoom back while that's cooking. Double click, I must say. And this is going to allow several things. We can change the blending mode if we want to change the blending mode, and also the blending opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and take this down to around 50 or 60% opacity. And because we've created a smart filter on the smart layer, we can click on the just lost it here for a second, the mask page, and now by using white or black paint with my brush tool, we go ahead and paint out. Oh, I need to get a different brush here. Let's get a soft edge brush. And now 100% I'm just going to go ahead and paint around the areas that I want to come back through the filter. And this is a very nice way. All of this is totally non-destructive, working with a smart object and, of course, a smart filter in this respect. So this is kind of how I wanted to start out with the double smart feature, even though this is a single layer that's a smart object. Okay, well, let's go back. I'm going to go ahead and close this image out. Let's close this out as well. Pardon me again. Here's an image that I created recently, and this is the original exposure. I'm going to go ahead and open the smart object. And what I want to do now is create the double smart processing that we've been talking about. And all that entails is this. I'm going to go to Layer, Smart Objects, and create a new smart object via copy. What we can do is just do a Command or Control J to get a duplicate copy of the smart object, but if we did that, they're actually connected together. So I want to get a separate smart object, and to do that we simply do a Layer, Smart Object, and then New Smart Object via copy. By doing this, we can double click now on the top smart object, and it goes right back into Adobe Camera Raw. And what I want to do here is increase the exposure, maybe add a little fill light. I just want to get a brighter image that has lots of excellent detail. And that's pretty much what I want to do with this image. I might change the color a little bit, but for now, this just shows you what the double smart processing I've been talking about is referring to. What I'm going to do next is add a layer mask. And as I add the layer mask, I'm going to hold down the Option key, which would be Alt-Key on Windows, and click the Add Layer Mask icon. This will fill the mask with black, and I'm simply going to take the brush tool with white paint and paint a kind of a spotlight right in here. And this is totally non-destructive double smart processing. So this is what I've been referring to in that respect. Hello. So you can see it's beautiful quality. It's excellent quality with the double smart processing. And before I go further, I do want to bring up this image, and hopefully my system will, there we go. Alrighty, I just made a paintbrush mistake here. Give me a second. Alright, in the layer panel, you might notice I have the horse and I have the motion blur of the horse. I'm going to select both of these, type Command or Control G to put the horses in a group, and then I'm going to make a copy of the group. With the copy, we're going to assign this copy as a smart object, and we can do that by going to Layer, Smart Objects, and Convert to Smart Object. And now we have the beach ball going here. So if there are any questions, now would be a great time to ask, even though I can't see them at the moment. Okay. The whole concept here demonstrating this is to show you one of the real benefits of a smart object, even though I was showing you the double smart process.
Eddie, there is one question that asked that. There were we had a lot of folks join us, and there are a couple that got in a little late, and they just wanted to ask one more time how you created a smart layer or smart object. You mentioned you had it set in your preferences.
Yes, I will go back to that in just a moment. At this moment, yeah, thank you. Since this is working, let me go ahead and show you this. I've taken the smart object as a group, and I've made it small by using free transform. I'm going to go to the original group, which has the original horse and the motion blur, and these are just pixels. It's not a smart object. Let me move this over here so I can now use free transform to transform that down to a small horse. And now I'm going to retransform the original image back up, and you can see it's quite pixelized. As a matter of fact, it's rather blurry. And now if I go to the smart object and transform it back up, it's going to access the original pixel data. Hello. I know it's probably going to take a moment to redraw on the screen here, but as you can see, this smart object is now back intact. So when you convert an image or layer or group to a smart object, it will always access the original pixel data, as it will from the raw file. And I'll show you that again in just a moment. Before I leave this particular picture, I want you to know all the stars in the background, there are 117 stars, and each one of those is an individual smart object, even though they're linked together. They're linked together because I did a Command or Control J to copy them, which would also be under Layer New, Layer via Copy, Command or Control J. So by doing that, all of these smart objects are linked together. By double-clicking on the smart object, I can go in and change something. And what I want to do just for a demonstration, let's get a different kind of brush here, and a smaller brush. I'm just going to paint a blue star here, save and close the file. And what that's going to do, it's going to update 117 smart objects all at one time. Pardon me again. And once again, we have the spinning beach ball of death. Hopefully, it'll go away in just a moment. Okay. I wasn't expecting this. I think it might be an older file. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, Eddie, as we're waiting for this, any thoughts on workflow advantages or disadvantages of using a smart object just versus opening the image normally and using the raw file as just a normal layer?
I've been working with just the raw file as a normal layer for years and years, and recently I've converted over to accessing the files as a smart object. And the reason is because we can go back and do totally non-destructive changes. Tomorrow, next week, when the art director wants to change something, we can instantly go back and make those changes from the original raw file. To me, that is just the best because it's totally non-destructive in that respect. I'll have to do a close-up here so you can see the new stars have the stars in it, but each one of those have been updated after just changing one star. And before I go back and show you the raw workflow, I just want to remind you how important color issues are. And thanks for laughing, Joe. Okay. Okay, so when you're opening a raw file, and I'll just go back to Randoline here. Oh, let's open this one. Oh no, this is not a raw file. But I do want to show you this important bit of information here. I'll get back to this in just a second. Going back to the raw file, opening the raw file, by clicking on the bottom purple line here, it could be blue on some computers, this brings up your workflow options. This is where I establish my working space I want my raw files to work in. And incidentally, I generally have it set to 16-bit. Today I'm using 8-bit just for the internet. And at the very bottom here, there's an option that you have to turn on. It's called Open in Photoshop as a Smart Object. And when you do this, you're then, each time you open a raw file, it'll open into Photoshop as a Smart Object, allowing you to make whatever changes you want to. And of course, the double smart processing is what we just referred to a minute ago. And what that is simply taking, and I've actually created an action to do this for me, but what it does, it goes to the layer menu item down to where it says Smart Objects because this is a smart object. And the second option here is called New Smart Object via Copy. When you do this, you can make a change. I'll double click on the New Smart Object. This goes right back into Adobe Camera Raw, and I can make any contrast or changes I want to. I'm going to change the clarity and the contrast here, and just select OK. And you'll notice that it only affected the top smart object, so they're both smart objects. That wasn't my real objective with this particular image, but I do want to show you this image. And both of these are smart objects, and notice that the bottom layer is a nice exposure. The top layer is a much darker exposure. As a matter of fact, the top layer happens to be the original exposure. The bottom layer, when I processed this, let's take a look. It was about 2 stops brighter with the exposure. So I went back, pardon me again. This is the original exposure, but there are 2 things here I want you to notice. Thing number 1 is I was trying to get detail in the sky, knowing I could process the image brighter as I've shown you. And the second thing is I had to come down at a lower camera angle because there were a bunch of cars in the background here. So the reason I'm showing you this is because I created a mask. This is the mask for the window, so you could see right through and get a pretty decent level of detail in the background here, and that's about 80% opacity. Well, there is one thing I do want to show you now that we're here, because when I went through all this and showed the model, I was using a 14mm lens, and the model and I both did not care for her arm being like this. So what I'm going to do is use, this isn't really a new feature, but I should have done this when I originally had my first smart object. I didn't do that. So what I'm going to do is merge both of these layers into a regular pixel layer. Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E will merge the bottom layers to just a floating layer here. And what I want to do with this layer is use the lens correction filter in Photoshop. And as you can see in CS5, instead of being in the distort, it's now under just the regular filter, almost right near the top there. And the way I'm going to correct this is the way you can correct it in any interface, such as this, in any version that has the lens correction. And all I'm going to do is go to the transform, the vertical perspective, change the vertical perspective all the way over, and this gives me a much nicer view of this particular image and perspective. It was a little extreme with the 14mm lens.
So Eddie, since a lot of people are asking this question, maybe I can just ask it for everyone. There's a lot of folks that are new to smart objects or haven't used them in the past. And the way I would kind of maybe try to explain it is, it's in essence a link back to the original image file. It's kind of like, would you say it's kind of like working in Lightroom, where you're making your adjustments, but they're not actually going to be applied until you do that flattened image. And if you update your change your smart object, all of the adjustment layers are then going to be applied to that change on the original file.
That's an excellent point, Joe. Thank you. And that is a perfect description, especially in Lightroom, which is a kind of a description processor. It gives you a set of instructions when you're making changes. So what I'm doing in Photoshop compared to what we would do in Lightroom, which would also be basically a non-destructive smart object kind of workflow, is the fact that here we have some very high-end masking capabilities. So what I'm showing you here with the a few filters in Photoshop and the masking capabilities is what Photoshop may be an advantage over Lightroom in that respect. But yes, when you're processing, making changes in Lightroom, that is also non-destructive. It's also in ProPhoto RGB and 16-bit. So it's an excellent workflow. But today, we're having fun in Photoshop because this is what we call image levitation. So thank you for your questions, and thank you for your answer there, Joe. It's perfect. Okay, let's move on to a different project here. And what I want to share with you next is what I call fashion contrast. It's just a kind of a fun technique. And the first thing to do with a fashion contrast, this isn't for every image. This is just for a certain kind of images. This particular image works really good for this technique. I think Joe and X-Rite are going to record this webinar, so I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit fast. And the first thing to do with this is to do some kind of soft-focus technique. I'm very quickly going to go through what I call my Monty Zucker MZ soft focus filter. And what I'm going to do is duplicate the layer. I'll double-click to rename this Darken 30. And what I'm going to do is use the Gaussian blur filter And with that, let's put in about 30 pixels. Actually, I'm going to put in 60 because I believe this was the 5D Mark II. And I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to darken at about 30% opacity. Next, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and we're going to rename this Lighten 60. That means we're going to change the blending mode over to Lighten at 60% opacity. And then we'll put both of these in a group, put a mask on the group, and then at 100% opacity, or excuse me, 100%, let's get another brush here. At 100% zoom ratio, we can then put black paint on the mask to bring back certain areas that we want to come back through, such as the lips, nostrils, eyes, eyebrows, that sort of thing, a bit sharper. This needs to be in lighten blend mode. I guess I hyper-clicked that just a moment ago. And now, as you can see, I'm painting blue paint. I'm hyper-clicking. Okay, this only happens when I'm doing a webinar. So let's go back to the mask here. And as you can see, this is, let's take this back up to 100% for now. You can see this is a beautiful soft focus technique. So whatever soft focus you want to do, go ahead and do that. I'm going to take the opacity down to 75% and just duplicate this. But this gives me a beautiful soft focus filter for this image. And now what I want to do is merge all of these layers to the top as we did a moment ago. The keyboard shortcut for that is Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. On the Windows platform, that would be Control, Alt, Shift, and the letter E. So we're merging all the layers to the top. You can see this is the only real active layer. But what I want to do now is to load the highlights of the image. And that's going to be Command, Option, Shift, and the number 3. And that would be in Photoshop, CS5, and CS4. In CS3, the keyboard shortcut to do this would be Command, Option, Shift, tilde key, which would be Control, Alt, Shift, 3, or tilde on the Windows platform. But this has loaded the highlight regions, and what we're going to do here is create an adjustment layer using curves. And I'm going to zoom up on the curve adjustment, so you'll see what happens to the image in just a moment, but I want you to see what I'm doing in the curve adjustment window. What I'm going to do is take the quarter tones and the highlight up and the quarter tones in the shadow down, creating a contrast curve or an S curve. And I want this to be as dramatic as possible. I don't care for the line to touch the ceiling or the floor, so I'm going to make as much of a curve as I can without going too far either way here. And this simply creates a very contrasty contrast curve, starting with the fashion contrast. Of course, what we see now is horrendous color. And if you, by any chance, attended my last webinar with X-Rite, you might remember this as being digital color crossover. So what we're going to do is take the blending mode of this layer to color. No, we're not. We're going to take it to luminosity, because all we want here is the curve adjustment, the contrast curve. So this is what we've achieved so far. The next thing to do with this particular curve adjustment is to duplicate it, which would be Command or Control J. So I've made a second copy. And yes, I know this looks awfully contrasty, but first let's take a look at the mask itself. This is the mask. Of course, this is the same mask we had on this layer, but what we're going to do here is invert this mask. Command, Control I, or we can go to Image Adjustments and Invert. And this creates a negative look. But let's go back to the curve adjustment, because what we're going to do here, we're going to take the shadow point back to the linear line and just brighten up the highlight region just a little bit. So the difference between the two curve adjustments is one is more of a contrast curve using the quarter tone and highlight and shadow, and the second curve that's been inverted is simply using the highlight. At this point, this is in fact what I call the fashion contrast look. This would be the beginning of that. And
Eddie, I'm going to break in a second. If you could unplug and plug back in your headset.
Go ahead, do that.
Sometimes bandwidth-wise, we do lose the the digital headsets coming over the internet, so just bear with us a minute as Eddie replugs in. While he's doing this, I am trying to answer all of your questions as they're coming in, so bear with me there. Eddie, I still don't have audio on you, though. I'm going to have to unplug and plug back in again. There you are. You're back.
Okay.
Okay, so Eddie, all yours.
Okay.
Check your volume again, though.
Okay, I'll do that. I don't know why it would go out, but let's see what happened here.
They always do.
Sure enough, it went out again. Okay.
Okay.
So hopefully we're back in line here. I apologize for
back.
the sound problem. Okay. Okay, so basically this is the fashion contrast look. I should mention that at the very beginning of the process, you want to do just your regular retouching and enhancement, and I did very minimal here. But there's one thing that I love about this is the look that it gives. The thing that I don't care for when I saw this image were the actual lips. And what I'm going to do now is once again merge all the layers up. That would be Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E, Control, Alt, Shift, E on the Windows platform. We're going to run just a smoothing filter here under Filter, Blur. We're going to go to Surface Blur. And what I want to do is soften up the lips, basically. So let's use about 10 and 100. 10 radius, 100 threshold. Pardon me. This is first going to blur the entire image, but we're going to put a mask holding down the Option or Alt key. We'll go to Black Mask, and then carefully we'll take a brush tool with white paint and bring back the lips. Now I'm doing this at 100% for now because the lips are way too soft. I know that, but we're going to blend that right back. The whole concept with using Photoshop is the ability to blend the images. So at this point, we're going to take the opacity back to around 50%. We're going to duplicate this layer one more time and change the blending mode over to overlay and give her maybe a little less opacity here. But this is what I call the fashion contrast technique. So I hope you enjoyed that. This is not for every image. It certainly is for certain images, but it's a beautiful look. Once again, this would be before and after the contrast look. Okay. I'm going to run over real quick to the Color Checker Passport. I want to show you something. I know that there's webinars that Joe will do to show you how to actually create this. So I just want to show you not how to create it, but the final results of creating a profile for your images using the Color Checker Passport. Of course, by photographing the passport, I was able to create a DNG file, and I'm going to open this image in Adobe Camera Raw, which this can also be done and applied instantly in Lightroom. But what I'm going to do next is go over to the Camera Calibration tab, and you might notice that the camera profile is Adobe standard. That's what the standard profile processing in Lightroom or Photoshop. But the profile that I created is called Budolina, and I want you to see what happens to the image color when we go from the Adobe standard to the Budolina profile. And I'm so excited. Let's just get a little closer here. Once again, this is before and after. I was so excited when I created this profile. My client was jumping out of their chair because they've never seen such accurate color with their product before. And their products are very, very colorful, as you can see. So I wanted to throw that in because these days I am creating profiles with the Color Checker Passport with every shoot that I do. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Okay. What's next is the skin tone technique. And what you're going to see is this would be the original capture, and this is the skin tone enhancement. I'll go back and forth again, before and after. This would be before and after. And I want to start out by showing you this image that was created by a close friend of mine, Jay Fletcher. And he contacted me and asked me to do the retouching as per a art director had requested. So let me move the image over here for just a second. What I want to show you, this is the before and after of the processing. Let me get a little closer in for you. And once again, show you the before and after. And this is ludicrous. They had asked for a tremendous amount of retouching and enhancement all over. But what I want to share with you is what I call the E-soft skin technique, and that is to create the beautiful soft skin that you can see on the model. It's a very quick and easy technique. This is not a smart object because I did not have the original raw file to work with. But what I am going to do is first duplicate the background layer, Command or Control J, and I'm going to run the filter we used just a moment ago that's called the surface blur. So I'm going to go to the surface blur filter, and this is a technique that I kind of developed because of this particular project. There are two settings here that I've worked with. One is the radius set to 10 and threshold set to 100, and another is the radius, pardon me, set to 20 with the threshold set to 200. And what determines that is how big the skin tone is on the image and the size of the file itself. Pardon me. I want to set this to 10 and 100. And once again, we'll create a mask over the layer, holding down the the Option or Alt key. This will create a black mask. So the technique here is simply to take the brush tool with a nice soft edge and paint back over just the skin tone. And you can see how quick and easy it is to get this beautiful skin tone look. Now, this is just for the skin tone. It's not for the hair, the lips, or the eyes, even though I'll get a little bit on the eye here, not the eye itself. But where I painted over the eyelashes, I'm going to switch back over to black paint and eyebrows and paint that back off. There we go. And as you can see, it creates a beautiful, beautiful skin tone. And even though I would do the neck and everything, I wanted to kind of hurry through this to show you the technique of the E-soft skin look. It's a wonderful technique. I've been using this even in combination with other images or other softening techniques recently. This is a model shoot I did for a portfolio, and this is opening the raw file. I do want to show you how I kind of processed this initially. I'm going to go to the adjustment brush, and this at this point could have been done in Lightroom as well. But what I did, just to show you, how do I turn that off for a second here? This is where the mask is, and I'm going to clear all so you can see before and after. Before and after. Let me get a little close up. And the only thing I processed with this particular brush was basically on her, not her face, but the rest of her skin. This is before and after. So this is the initial process. And then by taking this in and doing the same technique, it generated just a fantastic skin tone. So once again, now we do have a smart object, filter, blur, and surface blur. This can be done on the smart object. So I'm going to go ahead and take this to 2200. And because we're using a smart filter here, we'll go ahead and click on the layer mask, which would be the smart object or smart filter mask actually. I don't know the official name of that, but because the filter is taking a little bit of time here, I'm just going to run my mouse like this, which allows it to work faster. And that is a joke, for those of you that were taking me serious there.
I am laughing, Eddie. I just have myself muted.
Okay, thank you. That's like watching film process, isn't it? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is reverse the mask here by filling the mask with black, and then with white paint using the brush tool, we'll bring back the skin tone using the eSoft Skin results, and that would be on the face as well. So just a beautiful technique. You might want to try this. Be a little more careful. I'll come up, oops, wrong zoom there. And I'll switch back to black paint and then take the details off the eyes and the hair and the lips, that sort of thing. Okay. All right. So that's what I call the eSoft Skin technique. And in just a minute, we'll take questions from everybody, but what I wanted to show you next is just something I call Move It technique. The Move It technique can be done in Lightroom or in Photoshop, and since I'm here, I'll just do this right here in Adobe Camera Raw. The Move It technique is where we simply take the sliders, recovery, fill light, and even blacks, and sometimes contrast, and just move these sliders dramatically. This particular image will take a lot of moving. So I'll take the recovery all the way to the right. The recovery slider is a highlight recovery slider. And because this is a raw file, if this was not a raw file, all these highlights up here would pretty well be totally unrecoverable. And of course, there's some detail in the highlights region here. The fill light slider does just what it sounds like. It fills light in. And by using these two sliders, you can see how weakened the contrast has gotten. But by now taking the black slider, bringing the contrast back in, we're creating kind of a faux HDR look with these sliders. And this is what I call the Move It technique. So it's just fun to do. It's a beginning of some of the looks that I like to achieve with some of my images. So I thought you might be interested to see the Move It technique. Okay. Are there any questions, Joe, that we have that I might address at this time?
Okay. Again, for those of you that, of course, watching Eddie, we're watching a master at work, and he's trying to cover a lot in a short period of time. So yes, some of it is moving quickly if you've seen this for the first time. So as I've typed in to you, in case you haven't seen it, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out an email to everyone tomorrow and give you the link so you can review at your own pace. Eddie, a couple questions. Somebody did mention any thoughts on, I don't know, I'm not sure where this fits in, but any thoughts on using DNG files?
Absolutely. The DNG file workflow is basically the same as not the same, but it is basically the same as working in the raw format. So I don't have a DNG workflow per se, as I should, but I hope Peter Krogh is not listening.
Again, for those of you that aren't familiar with DNG, it's really just another way of designating a raw file that is peculiar to Adobe. And for those of you that are using, with the profiles, that are confused by the whole DNG versus ICC, DNG is something peculiar to Adobe, and right now the profile systems that are being created with the Passport, like Eddie mentioned, do use a DNG workflow. Now again, that's all happening in the background. You can use any raw file, so it really doesn't matter. And somebody does mention, do you profile all of your cameras, Eddie?
Absolutely profile all of the cameras using the Color Checker Passport.
There are a lot of Passport questions coming by. Stay tuned. Actually, if you check on the X-Rite Photo website, we will be posting our next date for the Color Checker Passport webinar. And we're going to go into detail about that as well as the monitor profiling. Also, somebody asked when you chose on the ludicrous image the surface, with the difference between surface blur and using Gaussian blur for that.
Surface blur is a little softer. It's a little smoother as far as the blur is concerned. The Gaussian blur, which I use for my soft focus filter, kind of blurs everything, including hard edges. The surface blur will kind of keep your hard edges intact, and it won't diffuse them so much. So this surface blur is a much nicer blurring algorithm.
And just going back to a couple more questions, people are asking about the passport image, the passport profiles. The passport profiles are much more than just using a neutralize, just getting that gray neutral. It defines how the camera records red, green, and blue. So again, if it's something new to you, there is currently a video on the X-Rite Photo website that gives you an overview, and we will be presenting complete details on how to use the passport. And I tell you, once I started using one, and I know Eddie's experienced this as well, once you start using the passport, you won't ever want to do any shoots without it, because what it does for your color, as Eddie mentioned for his clients, really one click you get all your color back. It's truly amazing.
Look, I've got a DNG file.
Eddie, here's a great question. Eddie somebody wants to know where Eddie got his Photoshop training from, and besides that, wearing the loincloth and living on the top of the mountain for 90 days, where did you go to get your training?
You're so silly. Interestingly enough, I started working in Photoshop in early 90s and became real frustrated after having an assignment that I couldn't complete. So I went in my basement for 2 weeks and closed the door. Nobody saw me for 2 weeks. I learned every corner I could possibly learn of Photoshop, and that was Photoshop 2.5. When I first became really kind of an intimate relationship with Photoshop. So I've been doing this for quite a long time now, but it becomes a need. There's a need, and all the techniques that I'm showing you have become some kind of necessity in my workflow, where I needed to create something, and this is the solution that I'm sharing with you. I did want to mention with the passport, since we have it up, that I use the passport for two things. The first thing I use the passport for is white balancing, whether it's in Lightroom or in Photoshop here. I'll use it to get a warmer or cooler skin tone compared to these patches, or a more neutral skin tone. Once I have selected the white balance, then I'll go and change the camera calibration profile to the one of the particular shoot. And you can see what that did. I'll once again show you before and after. And that I did want to mention that. I'm going to click cancel here. Joe, did I hear you kind of sneaking in there for a minute?
Let's see. Oh, yes. There were a handful of people that asked this. If you could just one more time show where you set the preferences for importing an object as a smart object.
Be glad to. And of course, we'll have to start with a raw file. Let me go back to the raw file here. I know this one's a raw file, so I'm opening the raw file. It opens in Adobe Camera Raw, and it's at the very bottom. There's a blue-purple line at the very bottom. If you can't see it, I don't know if you can or not. I'm going to zoom up for you. Hopefully you can see this. When you click on this line, it will bring up your workflow options with your raw files. So ProPhoto RGB 16-bit channel is what I certainly recommend, but this is where the option is, and you have to turn this on. It is not turned on automatically. To open, it should say open my raw files as smart objects. Now, of course, you can work with TIFFs and JPEGs in ACR and Photoshop CS5, and this may be an option for that, but I do not use JPEGs or TIFF files through ACR. Good question.
As far as the color space choice goes, you mentioned you're using ProPhoto RGB. There are still a lot of people out there using sRGB or going out to labs, and Adobe RGB for going out to commercials. So any warnings or recommendations for color space?
Well, if you ever listen to Seth Resnick, you will not use anything but ProPhoto RGB. But I have to tell you that sRGB is a small color space. It's perfect for the internet, and it's perfect for some of the labs. So if that's your choice and that's all you do and you have a closed loop workflow, then so be it. Adobe Camera Raw, did I say that? Adobe RGB is, of course, the most popular color space, and it's designed for anything from labs, even pre-press and inkjet printing, where Color Match is designed for the printing press mostly. I used to work in Color Match RGB because the majority of the work I did was going to be converted to CMYK, and this was a closer proximity. I can't get over ProPhoto RGB today. Working in 16-bit channels, it makes such a difference. My information is all there. It's a huge color space with today's technology, with the color printers and the profiles we can make using the X-Rite products for our printers. This takes advantage of that entire color gamut, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful workflow. It's probably that, along with using smart objects in my workflow today, has improved my quality pretty substantially.
All right, so let's see. Again, there's a lot of confusion as to where the camera profiles are coming from. They are coming from the Color Checker Passport that Eddie did take a photo of, and when we do our Passport webinars, you'll see the actual application that does that. Now, when you do create a profile in Photoshop using Adobe Camera Raw, or here's Eddie's showing the desktop application for the Passport, if you do it in here or in Lightroom, the other applications automatically see it. So, for example, if you create a profile, as Eddie's doing right here for Adobe Camera Raw, once it's created, Lightroom will see it as well. And if you do it in Lightroom and create a profile there, then Adobe Camera Raw will see it as well. So they all do talk to each other.
Well, what I was demonstrating without voice is you just can't take a raw file in there. It has to be a DNG file. Unless you're in Lightroom, then Lightroom you can just select your raw file and it takes it right in for you automatically. So quite frankly, it's much easier to create this profile in Lightroom than it is Photoshop, but this, you just saw how difficult it was to do it in Photoshop. You take a DNG file, you can create a DNG file from the Adobe Camera Raw workflow, and then you simply bring that image into Color Checker, click on Create Profile, and name it. And my system is having a fit today. Sorry about that. You can see the spinning beach ball, but here we go. I'll just call this Budolina. Well, let's just call it ASMP. I don't know how to spell Budolina. Let's just call it ASMP ET. And it automatically goes into the camera profile folder. It finds that itself. You can see how fast it's going to create the profile, and it's done. I mean, it's just that difficult to create a profile. Actually, it's that simple. So it's done. At this point, in order to see the profile, we have to quit Photoshop. I won't save that, but let's go ahead and reopen Photoshop. As a matter of fact, I will go ahead and open up one of these products here.
Eddie, while you're doing that, sorry,
yeah,
while you're doing that, again, a lot of people are asking about color spaces, and this is, again, a conversation that's probably beyond today's webinar. If you do stay tuned, check out the xritephoto.com website under the Learning tab where the webinars are listed. It isn't posted yet, but we will be doing a color workflow in Photoshop and Lightroom webinar that goes into extreme detail about the color spaces that you might be using and the what's and where's and the whys and the benefits and possible problems of working in each, and we'll definitely make that clear.
And I'll have to say on top of that that if we all had the same computer and camera and software and output options, and that was all we had, everybody had this exact same thing, we could set it up one way and be perfectly happy, but that's not the case. We're all using different cameras, different software, different computers, different operating systems, and different output needs. So we need to come up with a workflow that suits ours best. And thank you, Joe, for having a solution for us for that.
My pleasure.
Okay, so now you can see what I've done here with my image using the ASMP ET digital camera profile. It's a wonderful, wonderful workflow. Okay, so you know, I have other techniques I can share with you since we have a few minutes, I believe. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, unless there are some hot-to-go questions here. I will
continue on, Eddie. Do your thing. Let's fill. We got 5 minutes left. Let's fill it.
Okay. I'm just going to show you an incredibly simple technique. I'm sure a lot of you are doing something similar to this, maybe in different ways, but this is what I call cookie lighting, and of course I used to do this in the studio, setting up a parabolic or a sharp light source and cutting out a leaf pattern in a piece of cardboard or something of that nature. But what I'm going to do here in the layer panel, where did my layer panel go? I don't see it. Here it is. It was floating there somewhere. But what I'm going to do here is create an adjustment layer using curves. And to do this, we want to add density without adding a digital color crossover. So by taking the highlight or shadow point, I'm going to take the highlight point and bring it straight down without creating a curve. When you do this, you're creating density to the file without creating a digital color crossover. What is he saying? If I were to create a curve, look at what it's doing to the color. It's yucky. It's just not good. So what I'm going to do is just add the density by bringing the highlight point straight down along the wall. You can do a reversed option by taking the shadow point going up the wall. But what I want to do here is add the density. And anytime you create an adjustment layer in Photoshop, it automatically creates the layer mask for you to paint on with black paint. And I'll do this at 100% opacity. And all I'm going to do is make sure I have a soft edge, and wherever we put black paint on the mask, it will generate that cookie lighting effect. So this is what I just painted, and this is the cookie lighting effect it just gives us. So I do this on most my images. Most of the images that cross my screen have some form of cookie lighting, whether it's this quick and easy and simple, or whether it's a little more dramatic, and sometimes it is. It just helps in creating that dramatic look. And since you're here, and since Photoshop CS5 has been announced, there's a wonderful new option, and this is a raw file, and this option is also available in Lightroom 3. Joe, are you coming in?
I'm here, yes.
Okay, I just heard...
Oh, no, just no questions. Keep going.
Okay, the point is how the noise reduction algorithm in CS5 is pretty phenomenal. So you can pretty much see how much noise is in this particular image. But by going to the Detail tab, I'm going to take the luminance slider up, and you see the noise pretty much go away. It's a pretty fantastic ability to minimize your noise in the new version of Photoshop. So there's kind of a sneak preview since I'm using this beta version, and they've announced it. I think I am okay to do this and show this to you. I'm pretty sure I am. So the new noise reduction options in CS5 is pretty fantastic. And if you haven't seen the demonstrations, you'll be really interested to see this particular option. I was photographing this wall last year in England, and this young lady walked by and I took a picture. What the heck? But I got the other pictures that I really wanted of just the wall itself. You know, I'm out shooting textures as much as I can. So I've created a selection of this young lady, and there's an option in CS5 under, where is it? Oh, it has to be, this is a smart object, so you can't do this in a smart object. I'm going to duplicate the layer, and I'm going to rasterize the layer. Smart object. Well, I'm sorry, it did it itself. I was able to duplicate this without it being a smart object. That's because it was a selection. I'm going to start over here. Sorry about that. Well, let's just go ahead and take the smart object and rasterize it. And now with the selection under Edit Fill, there's a new option under the Edit Fill command called Content Aware. And what this does, it analyzes the selection that you have, and it looks in every direction to see what is around your object, and then it'll fill it in with the surrounding information. So in about 3 or 4 seconds, you'll see it fill in this particular area, and there it goes. And that is Content Aware Fill. It's pretty fantastic. So that's something new. I thought if we had a few minutes, I would go over a couple of changes there for you, and I hope you enjoyed those. Well, I want to thank all of you for attending today. It's my honor and pleasure to be with you. If you have any questions, you can contact me through my website, which is eddietapp.com. And I want to thank X-Rite for allowing me to be with you today and the Mac group. So thank you all very much.
Very good. And Eddie, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It is always such a pleasure. And let me just take control of the screen for a minute. And I just want to let everybody know about a couple of new things that are coming up. For those of you that are curious about the whole monitor profiling and workflow, and in essence making sure that what you see on your screen is what actually comes out on your printer, we do have a webinar scheduled for this Thursday. So if you go onto the xritephoto.com website, under the Learning tab under Webinars, we have a free webinar there. Again, we've seen a lot of information today, and I know for a lot of us it blew by, and we'd love to go ahead and review it. We will send out an email tomorrow to let you know where the link will be that you can watch the recorded webinar. I want to again thank Eddie Tapp for sharing his incredible breadth of knowledge and talents with us. And to see what he's up to, and to see Eddie's complete schedule of events, please visit his website and blog at www.eddietapp.com. And also, as I mentioned, let's just go on to the next slide here. If you're interested in learning how to get prints that match your display, we have the Thursday webinar scheduled. There'll be one at 1 p.m. Eastern and one at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Visit X-Rite Photo and go to the Learning tab for the webinar information and to register for free. I'd like to thank you all for spending time with us today. We'll do our best to get your questions answered. For those of you that sent us in some questions and weren't able to get to you, feel free to get in contact with us. Also, if you have any questions specifically for me, I will be presenting on Thursday the webinar. In the meantime, my email address is joeb@macgroupus.com, and I can go back up, let's see. I think I pulled that off this slide, but anyway, again, it's joeb@macgroupus.com. I will include that contact information in the email that we send out to all of you tomorrow. So again, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and we hope to meet again with you online soon. Everyone have a great week, and see you again. Bye-bye.